running.
Okay. So today I'm going to speak about QuizConforms, QuizCon Modern forms for SharePoint and Teams. And specifically, I'm going to speak about a new feature that we've just added, enabling you to connect your SharePoint Modern forms to external data sources. A quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with QuizCon. We operate from Toronto, Canada. We've been developing add-ons and apps since 2005. Okay, so just a few words about QuizConforms. This is not the main topic, just to give you the general context. So QuizConforms is a forms and workflow solution for SharePoint 2019, SharePoint Online, and Teams. Okay, the main concept behind QuizConforms is to provide end users who are not power users and are not developers, so they cannot use development studios or forms technical tools such as Power Apps or other development type tools. Provide them with simple and easy to use way to create dynamic forms and workflows. So this is the main thing that differentiates QuizConforms from familiar tools. And as I said, today I'm going to speak about the external data lookup. This is a new type of a lookup column for QuizConform, for QuizCon Modern forms. And it's also a part of the QuizConforms Enterprise Edition. So those of you who are already using QuizConforms, if you're using QuizConforms Enterprise Edition, you don't have to do anything. You'll just see it there. If you are using QuizConforms Standard or Professional Editions, you can get this app separately or upgrade to the Enterprise Edition. So it's up to you. So to use the external data lookup, you have to do two things. First of all, you need to add an external data source, and it can be of various types, and I'll show several examples. And this is a reusable data source that can be used by any consumer who can connect to it. And the second step would be to create the external data lookup column in the list or document library where you want to add it and connect it to your external data source. And I'm going to show you now a few examples of creating of these two steps in different use cases. A few words about the concept behind this external data source. So external data sources are created in the site collection level. You can also create them in the tenant level if you want to share them across your entire tenant. Of course, they support both anonymous and authenticated, such as MSAL authentication, because of course, if you want to connect, for example, to your Azure SQL server, you'd require MSAL authentication. A data source can accept parameters, and I'll show you how we can use this feature to send parameters from your form, from values in your field, sent as parameters to retrieve data from your external data source. And the nice thing here is that I'll show you, it comes with many ready-to-use examples. So even if you're not so techy like I'm not, it's really easy to start from an example and just change it a bit. Okay, so you can start from scratch, but it's better to use one of the examples, the ones that resembles your use case. And what I'm going to do now is just go over several different examples of how to create these external data sources and how to create the external lookup columns that connect to these external data sources. So the first example is actually something that so many customers have been asking me about, is how to implement a cross-site collection lookup. Cross-site lookups, you can find, there are many examples. QuizCom has also the cascading lookup, which is a cross-site lookup, and you can also implement with Power Apps and other tools. But many customers, since today also Microsoft suggests on creating site collections. Site collections are like the new sub-site we had years ago. So the recommendation is to avoid deep sub-site hierarchies and go more for the flat multi-site collection structure. So the need for a cross-site collection lookup became more common. So I'm going to show you how you can implement such a cross-site collection lookup using the external data lookup. So the first step, as I said, first step is to create your external data source. In our case, I need to create a data source to a SharePoint list, which is located in a different site collection, right? So to create an external data source, you need to go to your site settings, you click the gear icon, and you'll see at the last menu here is QuizCom Apps Settings. And once you click it, you'll get to the QuizCom Modern Apps Settings, where you see all the QuizCom Modern apps that you have available in your site. Okay, some of them are activated and some are not. And you need to go to, this is the new one that we added, which is called External Data. And once you click it, you get to the page where you can add or update your existing external data sources. So to create a new data source, you click the New Data Source button. And as you can see, we have many examples that you can start from. So in this case, I'm picking the SharePoint list items example. And this simply creates a new external data source, which is already pre-configured. And I'll show you what this pre-configuration includes. So it's a web REST API data source, and I named it topics because it goes to a topics list in another site collection. And if I go to the parameters tab, you'll see that it accepts 3 parameters. I need just the first 2, which is the site URL, meaning where is this remote list that I want to create a lookup to exist, in which site, and what is the list name or title. So I need to copy these. So I'm going to my other site collection where I have the target list, my topics list, and I just need to copy the URL and the list title, which is topics. So back to my external data source settings, I just pasted the site URL and the list title, and that's it. Now going to the connection tab, you'll see the result web service URL, REST API URL. Okay, you don't need to mess with it unless you want to change the columns that you want to get from the remote list. But I'm okay, I just needed the title, so it's here, okay? And last thing to do before saving is to make sure that your external data source properly connects to this remote topics list. So clicking on the load preview button here will load, will actually make the call to this remote web service and get the results. And these are actually the results, the topics from the remote topics list. So I've been able to create my data source, and here I can see the preview in a wider screen. And now it's time to save it. So after this phase, we have a topics external data source that gets the topics from a remote topic list from another site collection. Next step would be to create my external data lookup column, which I need to create in wherever I want it. So I'm going to my list. I called it cross-site collection lookup. And we need to add now the lookup column. So I'm going here to the QuizCom Apps toolbar button. Yes, this is a modern list. And same as you saw before, also in the list level, I see all the available QuizCon modern features. One of them is the external data. Once I click it, I just need to type the name of my new topic lookup column. And once I do it, I get the other properties. So I need to select the external data source to which I want to connect. And of course, I want to connect to the topics external data source that I just created. And then I need to choose, like in a regular lookup, by the way, the display column. So I choose title. There are other display settings that I will touch a bit later. All I need to do now is just save it. That's it. I created my external data lookup. And to test it out, all I need to do is just click new. And this is my external data lookup, which is actually now a cross-site collection lookup. And it also includes type to search feature. So if I type something here, it will filter and show me only the relevant options. So this is how you do accomplish very easily and quickly a cross-site collection lookup. Second example I want to show you is how to connect your form to Azure SQL. Actually, it's quite similar. So the first step would be to create an external data source. This time, it will be a data source that connects to Azure SQL. So in my example, I'm using AdventureWorks SQL database that we have, and I want to retrieve all the products. Okay, so this is actually the products table from our Azure SQL server, our Azure SQL. So going back to my external data settings page, I'm creating a new data source, but this time I'm selecting a different example, which is AdventureWorks SQL products. And again, it's pre-configured. You'll see that it's a web REST API data source type, and it can get one parameter, which is the category. You can filter by categories, but it's not mandatory, and I'm not going to use it currently. And this is the result connection. Okay, now looking at this connection, at this URL, it includes a few parts, several parts. The first part is QuizConf SQL querying service. Okay, it's this part. This is an Azure function that you can use also to access your SQL database. Second, you have the SQL query, which includes a from, which is the database name, the table name or the view name. And then you have the query itself, which means what columns we want to select and according to what condition and so on. Now, there are two ways to use this Azure SQL querying service, and it depends. There are customers that prefer different options. The first option is the option that I present now, is to use QuizConfs ready-to-use SQL server, SQL query web service. This means that you're using actually this exact function. Let me go back so you see it. You're using this exact Azure function. But before you use it, you'll need to register your connection string with us. So you need to send us your connection string. And this means that the query, the actual query, when you use it, will run from QuizConf's Azure environment to your Azure SQL. Of course, it will be securely connected through MSAL. And one more thing, the service that we offer is a read-only read-only querying service, which means you can run only simple select queries. You cannot run any update queries, and you cannot call stored procedures. We also do not cache the information, so there's no data saved in our Azure environment. The pros of this option is that you don't need to install anything. You just register your connection string with us, and you can just use it to query your database, unlimited queries, and a flat rate, which means we don't care how many queries you will run a month. The second option is for customers who do not want to run any queries outside of their from anywhere outside their Azure environment. So in this case, we offer a service, which includes, we just take our Azure function code, we install it in your Azure environment. Okay, so we create these Azure functions and web apps in your Azure environment. They can also be customized, and there are customers who ask us to create more powerful queries, like they want to run stored procedures, they want to run more complex database queries and so on. This is a pure service, okay? You don't need to use our querying service. We just install it on your environment so it becomes yours, okay? And this is a service. So you need to pick one of these two options. I'm going back to the external data configuration. So we have our connection string, okay? We know which database and the select query. Additional settings are you can keep a cache in the local user browser. So it's not a cache in our server, it's a local client-side cache in the user's browser. And it's good when you think that your SQL data, the specific SQL data, doesn't change too rapidly, so you can avoid unnecessary queries and improve performance. And of course, authentication. In our example, AdventureWorks example, we use anonymous, but of course, in real life, you would use the MSAL authentication. And that's it. When you click preview, you get your data to verify that indeed it retrieves what you expect it to retrieve, and you click save. And here in our example, we have an external data source, which is called SQL products. Now, the next step, as before, once we have the external data source ready, it's time to create the external data lookup column. So I'm going to my list. This time it's called category product SQL lookups. Again, I'm going to the lists QuizCom apps settings, selecting external data. And here I created a new lookup column called products. And it's connected to the external data source that I just created called SQL products. And I want to display the name of the product. And now I want to expose some more settings. Up until now, I showed you a regular lookup. A regular lookup displays just a drop-down, okay? But you can also configure the external data lookup. And also, this is true also to the cascading lookups that QuizCom has. You can also render it as a table if you need not just one column. You want to display 5 columns from the target data source in a table. So in this case, I also configure the display additional columns, and I also bring the for each product its SKU, list price, and color. And I also can configure paging, so I configured 20 items per page, and clicking save. So the way it will look, let's go and create a new item. So in this case, this is how the product's lookup column looks like. It's a table that enables me to get all this data from our SQL, okay? And I also configure it as a multi-choice lookup, so that this is why you see multiple items checked. Now, the next example is also a super common requirement, and these are cascaded fields or fields that are filtered by other fields. And I'll show this example using the same SQL example that I used before. So I want to add to our example a category dropdown that will filter the product, and the categories will also be pulled from SQL Server, from Azure SQL. So I need to go through these 3 steps. First, I need to create a categories data source, and then create the category lookup column, which will be populated from the matching table in our Azure SQL. And then this is the new thing. I need to go back to the products lookup and configure it to be filtered by the selected category. Okay, so starting with creating a categories data source, here I think you got the point. So in my example, in the AdventureWorks database, I need to query the product category table. So I'm creating a new data source, and I'm using another AdventureWorks example. And all I have to change in this example is the select query. So I need to select from this table, and this is the select, the query. Like I need the product category ID and so on. And I'm saving this product categories data source. And now I need to create a category lookup column. So I'm going back to my list, and I'm going to QuizConf app settings, external data. And here I'm creating a new category lookup column connected to my new data source, which I called product categories. And that's it. I'm saving it. And the last thing, this is the new thing. How do I connect the products to the selected category so it will be filtered by it? So going back to my product lookup column settings, at the bottom I have the ability to populate the data source parameters. Now this data source supports a product category parameter, and I want to populate it by the selected category lookup. So I need to click this picker, which will allow me to select all the available fields in my form. So I'm selecting the category. But once I select the category actually gets multiple columns from the categories data source. So I want to get the product category ID. I want to filter by the ID. And that's it. And once I click new here, you see that I see all the category, all the products. And when I select a category, it filters the products lookup to display only the ones belonging to the selected category. So I got my filtering, but this is not a complete solution. And that's because many times you don't want to get the entire data before it's filtered. In our example, imagine I have tens of thousands of products. So many times I wouldn't want to get all these tens of thousands of products before any category is selected, because there's no point. As an end user, I cannot deal with tens of thousands of products. I don't need to see them. And it just loads my network and my browser. So I would like to be able to make the category a mandatory, a required filter, meaning unless the user selects a category, I don't want to show any product. So to do that, you need to go back to your data source, and I'm talking about the products data source. And if you remember, we had here this parameter, which I left as is. Now, if I want to filter a data source at the data source level, I need to make the any parameter to be required. And once you make it required, you can also see the message that we display here. The data source will return empty result if a required parameter is empty. So by making a parameter of the data source mandatory, it means that the data source will not bring any data back until it gets a value for the required parameters. So here I'm making it mandatory, I'm checking it. And the result, I also changed here the products to display back. You know what, let's see it in my environment for a second. Okay, I had it in another browser here. Sorry, not this one. So I just want to show you this thing live. Okay, sorry for this. Okay, so this is my example. So you see now the products, I also configured it back to show just as a drop-down, but you see that now it's disabled and grayed and nothing appears here. It also means that the data is actually not retrieved from the data source. So actually no query is run against the Azure SQL. So only when I select a category, only then it populates, it runs the query behind the scenes and populate the products dropdown. Okay, so this is the meaning, and this is very needed by many customers that don't want to run huge queries for nothing. Okay. The last example, almost the last example, sorry, is connecting to an Excel sheet or an Excel table. So you can also connect your form, bring data to your SharePoint Modern form from an Excel file located anywhere in your SharePoint environment. So as usual, first thing, you need to create a data source. So I want to create a data source connected to my customer's Excel file, which is in my documents library. Looking inside, this is my file. So in this case, when you create an external data source, it will not be a REST API as we did in the previous examples. This time I'm selecting Excel or CSV file data source. And this is the name. And in the connection, I'm just selecting the Excel file in my library. And then I can select a table if there is a table in that Excel file, or a sheet. And once I load the preview, I see the data from my Excel file. I didn't mention it, but maybe you noticed that when you preview your data from a data source, there's the raw data and display columns. Raw data is the data as you get it from the data source, which may include JSON objects and a data which is not yet suitable for users to see. While display columns are columns that you create that can take parts of your raw data and manipulate it so it will be displayed to users as you need. So to add a display column, let's say I have this sector column returned as raw data, I want to create it as a display column. All I need to do is just click the plus icon next to it, and I'll get this pop-up. And here I can manipulate this, how I want to render it, in which format. Maybe I want to do some calculation on it or manipulation. So this is where you can convert your raw data to display columns, which are used later by the lookup. Okay, so these are my two display columns. And then, as usual, once you have your data source ready, you need to create your external data lookup column. So going to my list, this time I called my list lookup to Excel. And this is where I want to add my Excel lookup, going again to the lists, QuizCon app settings, and then external data. And here I'm adding a new column called customer, and it connects to the customer's Excel data source that I just created, showing the customer column. And that's it. It's super simple. Once I create a new item, these are the items that I see from my Excel file. Last example that I want to show you, up until now I showed you how you can connect a lookup column to a data source. It can be a remote SharePoint list or Azure SQL, and actually any web service. But many times you need to load not just one column. Many times you need to load many column values. So for example, here, when I select a customer, I would like to see below that customer's contact name, email, and phone. So I want to load multiple values into my form, not just this lookup. So in our example, when I select here a customer, I'm loading his email and sector. Now, how do you do it? In this case, you can use our JScript editor and snippets. When you select the JScript editor, you got here many samples, which enable you to do some more advanced things. One of the samples is called simply get additional columns from external data column. And once you select it, it allows you to define, okay, which data source column, additional data source column you want to get, and to which of your form fields you want to update with that value. So it's super simple. And this is the result. You know what? I have here a live example, I think. If I'm not, yeah, I think it's this one. Yeah, here I connected the product to the product's SQL, Azure SQL. And once I select the product, you see that it loads the product number, color, and price, if we have this data. Some of the products here do not have a color, or some do not have. Okay, so it loads all three of them. I also configured my QuizConforms to display these three columns as read only, because I don't want the user to change it. These are all settings of QuizConforms. It's really easy. So that's it. I hope it was clear. In case you want to check it out, you want to try it, I'm going for a second to our website. And you can see here, if you go under Microsoft 365 apps and you go to QuizConforms app, you'll see it amongst all other features here at the bottom, key features and benefits. Okay, so you'll see here everything that I talked about, so including cross-site collection, lookups, and external data, and so on. If you want to check it out, just go to our free trial and just go with this wizard, just put the URL of your site here and click connect, and it will install the QuizCon Modern package in your tenant catalog. If you don't like wizard, just click manual instructions. It will you'll get instructions how to upload the QuizCon Modern package, Modern Apps package, and deploy it. Other than this, you got here all the training videos as well as documentation. Okay, so and of course, if you want, there's another option. If you prefer to try it without installing it, you can also click here to try it in a private sandbox. And in that case, our